Hey, it's Kevin DeWitt here. Welcome to another plugin knowledge session. This week we're going to look at Neutron by iZotope. I have the advanced version here, so there's another version of this that's a bit lower than that, but I'm going to cover most of the features here. So if you don't have any of these features, that's purely because you may not have the advanced version. This version I have here is also version 2 of Neutron, so you may also have version 1, so again it might look slightly different. A lot of the concepts will apply, but obviously version 2 is new and improved. It has some new features, plus it looks a little bit different, but the general concepts are still there. Now, this plugin is an extremely powerful plugin. It's designed for mixing, and as you can see from the picture here, we have majority of the components that you would need to mix a song. Now, because there's so many components in here, it's pretty much impossible to go through all of this in one plugin knowledge session. So this is going to have to be broken up over several lessons. So what we're going to start with today is, this one is basically the overview. So we're going to talk about it just in general, about the entire concept of Neutron and the features that are generic to the entire plugin. In the future lessons, we will go into each one of these components: the gate, the equalizer, compressors, exciters, and transient shapers individually. But in this overview, we're going to talk about everything else that goes around that and works in conjunction with all of those. So this plugin can be used pretty much anywhere. So you could use it on any of your individual tracks, you could use it on buses, you could use it on your mix bus, and you can use any of the features of the plugin at any time. So if we sort of start from the top here, we have this section here. So it's automatically grabbed the name from the track that it is located on, but we can rename that to whatever we want. Now, that can come in very handy when you're using additional instances of Neutron. So for instance, if we had this on a bass track, if we named that bass and we had another one located on the kick or the snare, and we named those, when we use some of the features like masking, we will be able to individually see the names of each of those plugins in this list here. So we could easily identify which plugin we want to link together. And with version 2, there's also some integration with their new version of Ozone 8. So again, having these named can be very beneficial for that and make the integration between these plugins a lot smarter and easier to use. So in regards to the plugins here, as you'll see across the board, you've got included a gate, an equalizer, a compressor, 2 compressors, an exciter, and a transient shaper. And in each individual one of these components, you can install a preset. So if you click on the individual button here, you can load a preset just for that gate. Up here where we have presets, this loads a preset for the entire plugin. So it's going to install a chain of individual components. So for instance, if we come in here and we say, I'm going to set this to an acoustic bass, you would see that all of these plugins suddenly changed and have different settings. We could go to something entirely different. We could go across to a drums bus, and you'll see all of this changing. So this preset setting up here adjusts the entire plugin. But under each one of these individual components, we can also click the little symbol there and load just a preset for that one component without affecting any of the other components at all. We can turn each of these on or off. So as you can see, the orange ones mean they're on, gray is off. We can turn them on, off, whatever we want to do there. We can also adjust the mix of the plugin here. So up the top means that it's fully 100%, but we can blend a little bit in. So if we don't want to do the whole thing, we can blend a tiny bit of this component into the signal. We can also rearrange these, so we can move them to wherever we want. If we want to have a compressor before the equalizer, we can. If we want to have the equalizer before the compressor, we can. If you want to have the gate at the end or the start, transient shaper, whatever, you can rearrange these to any layout you like. We have some simple settings up here. We have an undo history. So as you'll see here, when I click that up, it shows us every single thing that I've done since playing with this plugin, including all of the turning on and off. So we can go back to any spot we want. We can go all the way back to the start or pick some place in the middle. So let's go back to the start. Now we can also create some sets. So you could go to that state there and set that as set A. You could go to there, set it as B and C, etc. So you can do up to 4. And then what you can do is quickly switch between each one of these. So if you want to try different settings that you've done and you want to see how each one responds, you can quickly switch between them while you are playing audio. And you can also clear your history there. We've got our settings panel. So we've got some settings for the general layout of everything here, enable tooltips, all that sort of stuff. Got some metering settings, and we've got settings for each of the individual components as well, so that we can adjust different things, show different components, how we want them to work. All that stuff there. We've got a help button there that brings up a great manual. We can bypass the entire plugin. So just simply doing that, switches on and off. We have a zero latency processing here. So this is obviously supposed to reduce the latency, in theory to 0. How well that performs, I'm not sure. But when we do click that in, we do lose some of the functionality here. So we will lose some of the settings down here, which are obviously not able to be done with zero latency. We've got meters here, so we've got peak settings, RMS, all that sort of stuff there. We've got a width control here, so we can widen or narrow the stereo field, as it says. We can also change the panning, left and right or center. We have a limiter, so we can have the limiter off or on, and then we can play with some settings here, and this is going to be impacted by whether we have that zero latency on, because we suddenly lose this setting. So with the limiter, obviously we've got enable disable here. Once we enable it, we then have several settings here. We can change the ceiling, so if we want to bring it down to allow a little bit of headroom left, we can do that. We have 3 different modes. So going by the manual, the mode 1 is referred to as clear. Mode 2 is a smooth setting. Mode 3 is a thick setting. So with the clear setting, they're stating that it responds more quickly and it better preserves the fast moving transients of the material. So with smooth, it's class that is, they're stating it's the most common setting. It's sort of in between number 1 and number 3, in between the clear and thick. It's appropriate for most materials, including vocals and dialogue. Setting 3, the thick one, the limiter responds more slowly, and it's very useful for louder, slow moving sounds like a big explosion, sound effects, or bass, that sort of stuff. So when you've got those sort of things, some limiters can break the sound up, etc. So this is ideal for that setting. Now on top of that, we've also got these settings here, and we've got an IRC, LL, IRC2, and hard. So the IRC2 is classified as transparency, uses a higher latency, and it ensures maximum transparency when hitting the limiter hard, particularly with low frequencies. The LL is low latency, so obviously, as it states, it works significantly at lower latencies. The difference between the two is they're stating that on sort of low frequencies you may notice a bit more difference in sound between the LL and the 2, and it's meant to give you the most efficient performance at lower latencies, but with still giving you the best sound quality and true peak performance, they're stating. Hard is what they're calling a brick wall and zero latency. So with this setting here, it's a hard limiter. It uses ceiling as an absolute guide. It says the final output cannot exceed that point. So this is basically a brick wall limiter. So the deal with this one is they're saying that it is the most CPU efficient and latency efficient, but this one here is not true peak compliant. So if you're concerned with true peaks and making sure that none of that has an impact, then you would not use the hard setting. But this is definitely what you would refer to as a brick wall limiter, that nothing can go past this ceiling at all in that setting there. Now, if this plugin was placed on a stereo track, we have a mono button there, so we could actually switch it to mono to check for any phasing issues, mono compatibility, etc. We can also switch the phase of this. So if we want to switch the phase, we can do that. Again, if it was a stereo track, we could swap the left and right around. So just quickly switch them over. We also have the component of Neutrino in here, which, if you watch one of my previous plugin knowledge sessions where I did Neutrino itself, which was a free plugin, that is this component here. So it's just that small part there. And I sort of did a run through that in the separate plugin there, but you've got the different types. So depending on what you've placed this track on, you can select the appropriate component. Okay, and you can also adjust the detail setting and the amount setting to get that. And this section here is spectral shaping. So it's doing some very low compression, sort of like multi-band compression, specifically designed depending on which section what type you pick and how much you apply. So it's a very subtle effect, but it's just supposed to enhance the quality and the shape of the, I guess, the spectral or the frequencies better suited for that type of instrument. We can adjust our input and output controls there. If we're coming in a little bit hot or going out a little bit hot and we want to adjust it, we can do that there simply. And if we just quickly play a track here, you can see the meters. Nothing magic about those. See, this line here is our limiter. So as I move the ceiling down, that's the ceiling of our limiter. And as I said, there's our input output. We're getting our values for peak and RMS in the left, and the out. And just as a comparison, if we add a stereo track, So this is what it looks like when we put it into stereo. So now when we look at our meters, we've got left and right, and we now have the capability to switch it to mono or swap the left and right. But other than that, the plugin is pretty much identical. And one of the big components here is this track assistant button. So what this is supposed to do is that it's supposed to analyze your track that you've got going on here and suggest some appropriate settings to what it thinks needs to happen. Now, you might think that's a little bit of cheating, which I guess in a way it is, but I would not attempt to do an entire mix running off Track Assistant. But if you've got a track and you just want to get some ideas of maybe how to start to approach it, it can be a good idea to run the Track Assistant, see what results you get, and then adjust them. I wouldn't just leave it where it is. I would definitely adjust it. So when we click on the Track Assistant, we get this page here. We can pick to auto detect, obviously, or we can manually pick what type of track it is on. We can pick a style, balanced, warm, up front, and an intensity. So obviously with the intensity here, low is sort of a subtle setting. Intensity, medium is obviously medium, and high is more aggressive type there. Let's just quickly run through a look at those. We'll do it on this bass track. So when we pick our settings, so let's see what auto detect does. Let's see if it actually can detect what this track is. We pick our settings here. So I'm just going for a balanced medium. Click on next. It's now waiting for you to play the audio. So you hear it clicking away as it's actually doing some settings, changing some things, doing calculations and comparing. And then we can accept it. And then what we can do is obviously run through and have a look at what it's done. So in regards to here, it doesn't have a gate. It has an equalizer setting, all these parts here. It's added an exciter, 2 compressors. And if we happen to look down here in the neutrino, which it also adds in there, it has detected it as being a bass guitar. So it has turned on it as bass, and it's just left the detail and the amount to 50%. So we can obviously adjust all of these. So if we have a listen to what it did, if we bypass first, so that's the result we get there. So we could come up here and click that to set A on our history. We'll close that. Now if we go to Track Assistant, let's try a different setting. So we could go with the warm setting. And again, now we could set that to B, and we'll close that. And then we could do another one and go up front. We'll set that to C. And then in theory, we should be able to switch between each one of these as it's playing and compare them. So as you can hear, there's a little bit of a difference between them all, and we could even go for more aggressive sounding there. So let's say, for instance, we want to go for a warm, but when we want to compare a medium setting, we'll set that to A, and then we will do the track assistant together, and this time we're going to go for a high aggressive setting. So now if we compare the two, so again, there's a bit of a difference with that there. So you'll notice when I'm bypassing and I'm bypassing or switching between, there's a bit of a stutter between it, and that's because of the latency. So let's quickly have a look at the limiter. So let's actually get this doing some limiting here and have a listen. So we have a maximum setting there of -20, but we're getting a fair bit of limiting happening on there. So if we switch between the three types, so it seems the hard setting is actually the cleanest setting when we're doing it on this bass. As soon as we switch to the other two settings, we get a bit of distortion happening. Okay, but that depends on the setting used there. So we're getting a lot of distortion on setting 2, and 1 and 3 seem a lot cleaner when it comes to these two IFC values. So that's the overall plugin there. That's a bit of an overview of the general settings and the entire plugin itself. Obviously, like I said, this is a very advanced plugin. There's a lot to cover in this, so we've still got a lot to go in each of these individual modules. So if you've got this, have a bit of a play with everything around these settings here. Get to learn this side of the stuff there, and have fun. It's a really good plugin. It can be fairly CPU intensive, so just check that, because you might not be able to use this on all of your tracks in your mix, because it may take up way too much of your CPU and start to crash your system. But it's pretty well justified, the amount of CPU it uses, because it is an extremely powerful plugin. So check it out anyway, and have a bit of fun with it. And hopefully this video has been helpful, and I'll catch you in the next one.